Good afternoon and welcome to today's wildfire safety webinar, where we'll discuss our wildfire safety and mitigation plans and what we're doing to keep our customers and communities safe. My name is Drew Hansen. I serve as a public information officer for Pacific Power, and I'll also serve as the moderator for this webinar. So we want to ensure that our customers are informed about the measures and investments that Pacific Power is taking to make our system even more resilient and reducing the risk of wildfires. So thank you all for joining us here today. And just as a note, we will host a questions and answers session at the end of the presentation. The webinar is scheduled to go until 4:30 p.m., so we'll do our best to answer the questions that come in. And to send us your questions, you can click the speech bubble icon at the top of your screen. A little button will pop up that says ask a question. You can click on that and then type in and submit your question. So the presentation, along with the slides, will be posted to pacificpower.net/wildfire safety. And in addition to more information on the company wildfire mitigation plans, that webpage also has a lot of great actionable information, such as outage kit checklists, links to an interactive public safety power shutoff map, and a 7-day forecasting table. So be sure to check that website. We'll mention that again later in the presentation. And with me here today is Alan Barrett, our Vice President of Operations for Pacific Power, and Stephen Vanderberg, who manages our in-house team of meteorologists and our weather monitoring program. So they'll be our primary hosts for today's conversation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alan Barrett.
All right, thank you, Drew. Good afternoon, everybody. As Drew noted, my name is Alan Barrett. I am the Vice President of Operations for Pacific Power. And thank you for your interest in Pacific Power's wildfire mitigation efforts and joining the webinar this afternoon. That's appreciated. I'll start by reviewing the company's plan development and journey. Then I'll dive into the plan itself, touching on the key elements that you see noted here on the slide. We'll talk about risk assessment, the programs and system hardening, situational awareness, and the dynamic risk assessment that it provides. We'll talk about public safety power shutoff protocols. Then finally, we'll touch on community outreach and education that's part of the program as well. Given the short amount of time that we have today, I will be covering the information at a high level, but I would encourage you to dig into the wildfire mitigation plan itself, which is available at the link Drew just noted. It's available on Pacific Power's website. You can dig in. See all the detail that is involved in the wildfire mitigation plan. So that's available as well. All right, so first let's start with the plan development and the journey so far. So Pacific Power's 2022 California Wildfire Mitigation Plan, or WMP, builds upon multiple years of experience across various states, which you can see depicted on this slide. Beginning in 2018 with rulemaking in California, we have since expanded our programs to multiple states, either informally or through formal rulemaking. Currently, the company manages wildfire mitigation programs in California, Oregon, Washington, and Utah. This plan reflects a comprehensive or enterprise-wide approach to mitigating risk by combining input from multiple business units, subject matter experts, and industry best practices. Approximately 50 individuals over a dozen departments contributed to the elements of the 2022 plan, many of which you can see depicted in the graphic on the lower right side of this slide. Given the comprehensive nature, the plan also includes long-term, multi-year investments. Currently, we plan to invest over $110 million over the next 2 years, with an expectation of additional investment to continue beyond 2023. This investment is intended to reduce the risk of wildfire in California by moving forward key programs such as situational awareness, line rebuilds, and enhanced inspections, just to name a few, all of which are identified in more detail in the published wildfire mitigation plan. Now let's talk about the foundation of the plan, which has remained fairly steady over the last few years as we've developed the wildfire mitigation plan in California. And it all starts with situational awareness. whether through baseline risk modeling, which combines 30 years of historical data and advanced simulations to highlight areas of greatest concern, or through dynamic risk modeling, which includes weather forecasting, weather monitoring, and fire modeling to understand risk at a very granular level and inform operational protocols and day-to-day decision-making. Once the high priority areas are defined, we move toward increasing the resiliency of the system in those areas. This can be accomplished through programmatic shifts, which focuses on changing the way we maintain our system and tend to have shorter implementation time periods. Examples include enhanced inspection programs, the acceleration of condition corrections, or the introduction of enhanced vegetation management practices. Additionally, increasing resilience can be accomplished through longer-term investments, such as the deployment of covered conductor. This strategy in particular aims to retrofit the system and protect the impacts of incidental contact, which in turn reduces the risk that the electric line can become a source of a fault or wildfire ignition. While the system hardening aims to prevent the system from experiencing a fault, another strategy is to facilitate a system that reacts quicker when there is a fault. This involves replacing our relays and reclosers with new equipment that has increased capabilities for more sensitive settings and alternate protection and control schemes. This strategy also includes the risk-based deployment of those alternate settings, paired with the installation of new fault indicators to facilitate faster restoration during outages. These three guiding principles of situational awareness, system resilience, and rapid response form the foundation of the plan and form the key elements of the plan, which I'll now walk through. The first element of Pacific Power's wildfire mitigation plan is baseline risk mapping, which informs the strategic investment. In California, Pacific Power provides electricity to approximately 45,000 California customers via 62 substations, 2,500 miles of distribution lines, and about 780 miles of transmission lines across nearly 11,000 square miles. This is where the system-wide elements of our plan may be applied, such as the weather station deployment, the situational awareness, augmented operational practices, and community education and outreach. That's across our entire service territory. As you may notice from the image on the slide, our California service territory is very broad. Baseline risk mapping helps to take this broader service territory and identify areas where additional wildfire mitigation efforts make sense. So these highlighted areas are commonly referred to as the HFTD, or High Fire Threat District. The HFTD was developed through a multi-year state-led effort and represents the locations of elevated wildfire risk in Pacific Power service territory. The HFTD includes approximately 850 miles of overhead distribution and 350 miles of overhead transmission in the Northern California service territory. Fittingly, the HFTD is also where programmatic shifts are applied, such as the changes to asset management or vegetation management practices. And finally, we move to the identification of PSPS zones, or the public safety power shutoff zones, which is a subset of the HFTD, where significant escalation potential exists due to the wind patterns, the vegetation, the population. All these considerations make it a candidate for an escalated area. The PSPS zones, which correlate to Tier 3 and are comprised of approximately 250 overhead distribution line miles, are then used to identify and prioritize system hardening and the targeted PSPS preparations. Now let's talk about these programs and the strategic investments. So the left side of the slide includes programs augmented in the HFTD to change the way we maintain our system. Right? These programmatic shifts in the HFTD under asset management include the increased frequency of inspections, and through those inspections, the accelerated correction of fire threat conditions, and an annual infrared IR inspections of overhead transmission lines. Now, regarding vegetation management, we are continuing to leverage best practices. We plan to perform annual inspections in these HFTD areas and perform annual pole clearing of equipment poles, clearing any vegetation around the base of the pole. In addition to these programs, system hardening, which is prioritized, includes multi-year long investment of over $100 million to rebuild the lines, replace the relays, the reclosers, and fuses. Regarding the line rebuild program, Pacific Power plans to rebuild over 250 miles in the next few years, 112 of which are planned for completion or partial completion depicted in the image on the right-hand side of the slide. As part of the program, these lines may be either moved, removed, retrofitted with more resilient materials, such as covered conductor, or converted to underground, or some combination of those for all the line miles associated in that area. At this time, though, the majority of the miles have been identified for retrofitting with covered conductor, but the company plans to continue evaluating each project as it moves through the project pipeline to come up with a fit-for-purpose solution that reduces the risk for that area. A few example projects are highlighted in the map on the right, as well as the pictures on the left there. We've completed 3.5 miles in the Mount Shasta area, which represents an investment of about $2.3 million of line rebuild. And we are nearing completion on 6 miles in Dunsmuir, which once complete will reflect an investment of approximately $3.6 million, sorry, for those miles completed. Just to give you a feel for the magnitude of the rebuild and the investment being made in the wildfire mitigation programs. So now I'm going to turn it over to our meteorology to walk you through and tell us about the weather modeling and a situational awareness in more detail.
All right, thanks, Alan. So yeah, let's start here with some of the weather forecasting technology that Pacific Power is investing in. When it comes to staying ahead of any weather or wildfire related risks, we are investing in several types of weather forecast models that we run in-house to better prepare for and anticipate these kinds of conditions. So one of the things we're doing is we are now running our own weather research and forecast model. So this is a high resolution weather forecast model that gives us a 96-hour forecast for not just weather conditions across our whole service territory, but also the fuels conditions. So what's the moisture content of the dead vegetation that's on the ground? What's the moisture content of the living vegetation? And how is the fuels environment responding to changes in weather conditions? This is quite a large forecast model. We're generating over 1 terabyte of forecast data daily. And so this is really helping us stay ahead of the weather. Another model we have is something we call it internally LRAM, or the Localized Risk Assessment Model. There's an operational component to this, which takes some high resolution forecasts from the government and brings it down to our circuit level and is available for us to look at daily, which not only provides us with sort of what's coming in terms of those weather conditions, but also how it relates to the past. And speaking of which, we're also generating a 30-year hourly reanalysis of weather conditions across the territory. So for every 2-kilometer grid cell across our service territory, we're going to have a 30-year hourly history of weather conditions. And why that's important is because once that has been generated, we're able to take that and correlate it with, for example, system performance, or in other words, outages, right? So what conditions did we see in the past that correlate with different kinds of outages on our system? We can also correlate it to things like wildfire occurrence and wildfire spread. And once all of this work has been done, it serves as the foundation for an impacts-based forecasting system. So that's how we put that terabyte of data to use every day. We run our model. It gives us a forecast hour by hour of temperature, humidity, wind, the fuels conditions, etc. It references that 30-year history and all the data science that then can translate that forecast for us into impacts. So in other words, if you take a snapshot of Northern California and we have this wide range of forecasted weather conditions across all of our transmission and distribution lines, this will then begin to pull out the important details that says, yes, it may be windy here, there, and all across Northern California, but it's these particular locations where we're seeing conditions that are you could consider atypical, or conditions that are associated with different types of outages, for example. And so that's very important for us in terms of staying ahead of the weather. It's not just knowing what's coming, but what it means in terms of impacts. And the second part of that is, what's the potential impact of those conditions on the overall wildfire risk and fire environment? So we're also investing in a lot of fire science technology, including fire propagation modeling, where those models take in all of our weather forecast data that we generate daily, and then we run millions of wildfire simulations across that 96-hour forecast period, and then we map the results. So again, using the example I gave earlier of a high wind event where we know there's high winds coming, and we're able to sort of look at that not just from the standpoint of what the wind speed is going to be, but what the impacts are going to be. We can then also look at the output of these wildfire modeling simulations to say, well, here's the areas where we see the greatest wildfire risk. Here's the areas with the greatest potential consequence. And it's really that intersection of wildfire risk and outage risk and weather risk where we're most concerned. But in addition to that, we can use the 30-year data and also run wildfire simulations back for that period, for past events or past years, past fire seasons. And that can help us for things like long-term planning. So Alan mentioned some of the work we're doing in Northern California, for example, in the Dunsmuir area. These tools will allow us to better understand the risk across the landscape and how it may be changing over time. So that's sort of the weather forecasting piece. The next piece of this is all about the real-time situational awareness. So by the end of this year, we expect to have upwards of 80 weather stations in operation across our portion of California. And this station data is extremely critical or valuable to us for real-time operations, because it allows us to track real-time conditions and compare them to the forecast data that we've been using in the days leading up to the event. So in other words, okay, we were anticipating a high wind event. What are the weather stations showing? Are we trending stronger than forecast, weaker than forecast? Are the winds showing up earlier than forecast? Are they showing up later than forecast? And that's really important for that real-time decision making, because as we know, even with the best forecast, the weather can always throw us a curveball, and these stations are going to help us stay ahead of those curveballs. This data is publicly available, and as the network expands, we will be making this data available to everyone, customers, and not just folks in the company. And we've created a website where you can grab that data as well as other weather station data from other sources, such as the National Weather Service or the Forest Service. And that website is pacificpowerweather.com. And if you go to that website, you will see all of the current weather observations from not just our weather stations, but from the National Weather Service and the fire agencies and Department of Transportation, right? All of that's there for you to see. And when you click on those stations of interest, you'll also see the climatology. So you may recall on the previous slide where I mentioned we're not just looking at what the weather forecast is, but we're creating the 30-year history and trying to get a sense for what the forecast and current conditions mean relative to what's occurred in the past. And we've started to build this into these websites. So when you see a station highlighted yellow, it means we're in the top 5% of wind gusts that have been observed at that location. When it hits the red, that means we're in the top 1%. And sort of in general, you can consider winds of that level or nature to be more impactful, And that's good. So a 50-mile-per-hour wind in Weed is very different than a 50-mile-per-hour wind in Dunsmuir, which is different than a 50-mile-per-hour wind in Happy Camp. And that's all reflected on this website. In addition to that, we actually have expanded our meteorology program to include 5 full-time meteorologists, one of which is me, and we provide 24/7, 365 support to the company. So not only are we prepping daily forecasts and communicating that forecast to the company every day, but we're also monitoring those conditions in real time, particularly when we end up in a situation where we're dealing with severe or impactful weather, right? And we support all that decision making through the Emergency Coordination Center and through just day-to-day operations. And so that's sort of I think a high level of what we're doing. It's the weather forecasting and the wildfire modeling to better map and stay ahead of any potential severe weather or wildfire related risks. And then it's the real-time situational awareness piece to be able to respond in real time to those conditions as they develop. And so that concludes my portion of the presentation. So Alan, back to you.
Thanks, Steve. So now let's pick up where Steve left off. So we take that situational awareness, we take that dynamic risk assessment, and what do we do with that internal to the company, right? And so that information informs our key decisions or our changes to operational practices. And so we have risk-based changes to work practices, such as the augmentation of working hours or redeployment of resources to perform additional patrols, as well as risk-based changes to system operational practice. And these changes come in the form of alternate protection and control schemes, which this can be faster tripping to identify potential faults faster, increased open times during cycles to allow for the heat to dissipate in the faults or reduce reclosing attempts. So these wildfire mitigation strategies, while important and are reducing the risk, there is an indirect relationship to reliability, meaning when we're in a more sensitive protection mode for wildfire mitigation, and so the circuit might open up and create an outage either more frequently, or the outage due to patrol requirements, the outage might be longer, all to reduce the wildfire risk, but creates longer outages. And so to help balance this, PacifiCorp is also deploying additional communicating fault indicators in strategic locations that help pinpoint these fault locations quicker, which reduces the patrol times and limits the impact to customers. So while some of the risk mitigation creates longer outages, we deploy other mitigation tactics to balance that out because we understand the impact to customers. And finally, public safety power shutoffs or the PSPS events are one of those tools as well. And daily assessments and status reports are used to assess forecasted risk and whether or not PSPS protocols should be implemented. So let's talk about PSPS a little bit more. And so public safety power shutoff is a tool that may be used by utilities, but as a measure of last resort to reduce the risk of wildfires, right? We understand the impact that PSPS events can have on our customers, the impact it can have on the communities we serve. Therefore, at the core of our decision-making and the overall PSPS program is balancing the risk of the conditions surrounding a potential event with the risk created by the de-energization itself. And so we're looking to understand that and evaluate that risk when we're making these decisions. Throughout fire season, situational awareness is leveraged to continuously monitor the conditions, as Steve was describing. As risk increases, we then incorporate a range of additional factors into assessing the need to implement a PSPS. So some of these factors can include the real-time monitoring of local conditions, boots on the ground information, weather forecasting, and dynamic input from our public safety partners, meaning we reach out to the community and understand what the impacts and what the various agencies are seeing and how they view the situation and what should we know and what should go into our evaluation of whether or not a PSPS event should be implemented. When a PSPS is implemented, PacifiCorp focuses on key communication protocols, including advance notice to those public safety partners and key updates to all customers and critical facilities throughout the event. In 2022, we're looking to continue to evolve that coordination and communication as we work to stand up a public safety partner portal. And while still in its initial development, this portal will eventually serve as a consistent place where our public safety partners can access key information and like GIS shape files during an event and stay up to date as the event evolves using that portal. And that's coming here in the next few months. All right, in the event that PSPS is implemented, Pacific Power leverages 3 different programs to mitigate the potential impacts to customers and the communities. So if needed, we have the ability to activate a community resource center, a CRC, at pre-identified locations, which are all within 15 miles of the various PSPS zones, potential areas for the public safety power shutoff. When activated, these CRCs provide critical services to our customers and community members, such as shelter, restrooms, charging stations, on-site medical support, refrigeration, ice, the needs of the community during a de-energization event. During the single PSPS event we had in 2021, Pacific Power successfully activated a CRC at the Dunsmuir Community Center. Additionally, Pacific Power began offering 2 backup generation programs to customers in 2021. The free portable battery program offers a technical assessment, training, and a backup battery to medical baseline customers living within the HFTD. Additionally, Pacific Power now offers a flat rebate on qualified generator and backup battery purchases to customers living in Tier 3 or Tier 2 areas, with an additional rebate offered for AFN vulnerable customers. All right, in addition to the investment, the protocols and customer programs, Pacific Power takes a multi-pronged approach through the year to ensure preparedness and education of our customers and communities. We facilitate collaborative sessions such as tabletop exercises with public safety partners, where we work with our partners to prepare for or other emergencies. Additionally, we work to get key information out into the communities we serve via social media, radio campaigns, brochures, and flyers, a few of which can be seen there on the slide as examples. We also host webinars, such as the one that that's occurring today that you're participating in. These efforts tend to be front-loaded in the year to ensure everyone is prepared for the upcoming fire season. Furthermore, we maintain additional information throughout the year on our website, and the links have been mentioned several times as we've walked through here about the different information that's available on that website, but it's available to anyone and everyone to go to our website and learn about different ways that they can be more prepared for wildfire season, wildfire preparedness, even at their house, what they can do and what we as the utility are doing. All right, that concludes our official presentation walkthrough, and I believe now we're going to transition to the Q&A opportunity. So Drew, I'll pass it back to you and see if any questions have come in while we were walking through the material.
Excellent. Well, thank you for covering all that great information, Alan and Steve. And yeah, right now is the question and answers portion of the webinar. So far, we have not received any questions. So to send us your question, you can click the little speech bubble icon at the top of your screen, and then a little button will pop up that says ask a question. Click on that, and you can then type and submit it. And I guess while we kind of wait for any potential questions to come in, I have one that I'd like to throw out there, Alan, to you. So I know that the focus of today's conversation is on wildfire prevention, but could you speak to how does some of the system hardening that you covered early in the presentation, how does that work, like the construction projects around Mount Shasta and the Dunsmuir area, how does that impact system resiliency year round, like for winter storms and other weather events?
That's great. question, Drew, and one we do get frequently. So if you imagine when we rebuild that line to covered conductor, what that's doing to make the system more resilient, not just for fire season, but for other seasonal storms, from the wind storms that might be happening in the spring to winter storms, in the wintertime, snowstorms, is that covered conductor allows incidental contact of tree branches. Instead of coming into contact with that bare metal and potentially creating a spark or a fault, the branch instead hits that covered insulation that's over the conductor, right? And so the branch doesn't come in contact with any metal, and then just continues to fall to the ground. And therefore, that doesn't create a fault in the summertime. So therefore, wildfire kind of mitigation. That same scenario in the wintertime wouldn't create a fault, wouldn't create an outage. And so therefore, we increase the resiliency of the system year round. It does go beyond fire season.
All right, thanks for answering that. And I think too, as a follow-up, what does that work look like in the face of maybe potentially reducing the need for a public safety power shutoff?
So as we rebuild these lines to the covered conductor, if you picture a community which might have a substation in the middle and the lines kind of go radial out, as we rebuild these lines and you look at the risk that Steve was talking about, the weather conditions and all that, a more resilient system means the weather patterns, the wind can be a little bit windier before there's actual impacts to the system. And so therefore the area, the scope of what might have to be de-energized becomes less as we complete these line rebuilds or covered conductor or wildfire mitigation programs. So it really just starts reducing the scope and potential for the need of a PSPS.
Thanks for that, Alan. And just as a reminder, if you click on the bubble with the question mark that says Q&A below it, that'll pop up a little screen and you can type in a question there and we'll be happy to answer that for you. I know that this webinar was focused on California to an extent because we highlighted a couple significant projects that are ongoing. Maybe a question for Amy or Alan or both of you here. Could you maybe talk a little bit about the overall scope, maybe on a Pacific Power scale? Because I know that we have similar plans in place in Oregon and then to some degree in Washington as well. And maybe what that scope of wildfire mitigation investment and work looks like.
So that's a great point, Drew, and I appreciate you kind of asking that question because one of the strengths that PacifiCorp brings to the table is the fact that we're operating across 6 states. And while the conversation for us might have started in California, wildfire mitigation, we're definitely using that conversation and applying it to our other states or other service territory. And so the benefit that all our customers get out of that is the resources that we can bring to the table, right? So the scope of the projects. Our California service territory has, as I described in the presentation, a smaller footprint than maybe what our Oregon wildfire area represents, but it's the same lessons learned, it's the same program elements, and we bring all of our resources to bear to reduce this wildfire risk. And that's one of the benefits our customers get at PacifiCorp, is that they get the 6-state approach applied and to the local area, right? And adopted for what the local area requires at the same time.
Okay, thanks, Alan. So again, if you click on the bubble with the question mark that says Q&A below it, you can submit a question. I'm happy to answer it. In the meantime, I'll talk a little bit about how we're engaging with our customers on this topic. So soon, hopefully, most of you will be seeing some paid advertisements, just talking in general about wildfire preparedness and safety, and that it is a shared through this presentation. We're putting a significant amount of work into mitigating against this risk, but there's also steps that you can take at home, such as building defensible space, having an outage kit prepared. And on the Pacific Power website, so it's wildfire safety. There's a ton of great resources and even external resources too that you can go to find out more information about steps you can take to stay safe during the wildfire season. So, and I see that no questions have come in at this point. There is a contact form on the Pacific Power website. You can fill that out and submit it in, and we'd be happy to get back to you and answer your question. And with that, I would just thank everybody for participating and being here today to listen in on our wildfire mitigation work that we are performing. And as I noted too at the top of the webinar, it will be recorded and available likely by the end of tomorrow on the Pacific Power Wildfire Safety page. So you can review it again, and the slides will be on there as well. So once again, thank you all and have an excellent rest of your day.